I'm Professor Sylvia Barak-Fishman, and it's my pleasure to introduce this morning this session in the ISGAP seminar series on the intersectionality of anti-Semitism. Given the global pervasiveness of anti-Semitism today, its online presence and its inroads into the mainstream, there's probably no greater challenge than for scholars of anti-Semitism to reconsider our assumptions about what anti-Semitism is and where it is and how anti-Semites mobilize. We're interested in the insights that can be gleaned across regions and across areas of the world, and paying in-depth attention to specific cases as well as the big picture. Our speaker this morning, Dr. Naya Lecht, is an outstanding person to help us understand what we're looking at. Her title is Between Particularism and Universalism, Anti-Semitism Education in America. Dr. Lecht was born in the Ukraine and came to the United States in 1989. She holds a PhD in Russian literature from UCLA, where she wrote her dissertation on Holocaust literature in the Soviet Union. Her academic background studying the Jewish experience in the Soviet Union shaped her interest to investigate contemporary anti-Semitism in other parts of the world, including the United States. Naya is the director of an amazing organization called Club Z, a rapidly growing Zionist youth movement, where she has developed a unique curriculum on the Arab-Israeli conflict. In 2018, Naya was a scholar in residence at Oxford University through ISGAP. She writes and speaks about the legacy of communism, the Holocaust, and modern-day anti-Semitism. Again, she'll be speaking on Between Particularism and Universalism, Anti-Semitism Education in America. Now, as Dr. Lecht is speaking to us, if you have questions, please put them into the chat function. She's going to speak for about a half hour, and then we're going to have plenty of time for questions, answers, and conversations about her very critical subject. Dr. Lecht, please.
Thank you so much, Professor Fishman, for introducing me, and thank you so much to ISGAP for having me today. I'm going to start sharing my screen. So bear with me for a second. Okay, so indeed, my talk is titled Between Universalism and Particularism and the State of Education on Anti-Semitism here in America. I want to just briefly talk about the title of this talk, which is that tension that seems to plague Jewish identity and self-awareness. And that is the tension between universalism and particularism. And my talk here basically is addressing the problem, but also offering a solution. So I'm going to begin in a little bit of an unorthodox way. And I want to start by quoting Vladimir Lenin. Years ago, when I was teaching the history of the Soviet Union at UCLA, I devoted a week in the class on the Jewish question in the Soviet Union. And when Lenin came to power and when he was mobilizing the newly formed government, he made sure to outlaw anti-Semitism. And I'd like to read this quote to you from Lenin in 1919. Anti-Semitism means spreading enmity towards the Jews. When the accursed Tsarist monarchy was living its last days, it tried to incite ignorant workers and peasants against the Jews. The Tsarist police organized pogroms against them. The landowners and capitalists tried to divert the hatred against the Jews. It is not the Jews who are the enemies of the working people. The enemies of the workers are the capitalists of all countries. And among the Jews, there are working people, and they form the majority. And when I was teaching this, I asked my students a fundamental question, which surfaces in this quote, which is, what is he saying? What is Lenin saying about anti-Semitism? Well, what he's actually saying is that anti-Semitism is not the root evil. What the root evil is capitalism, religion, and the monarchy. And basically what he was saying is if we root out anti-Semitism, we will root out the greater evil being capitalism and the monarchy. Now, I want to leave this quote. I will return to it because I think it's a very important framing. And today, that is the conversation, is about framing. Now, a few cursory remarks on the state of affairs of anti-Semitism today. This is not news, but in particular, since the latest conflict between Hamas and Israel in May of 2021, in the United States, surging anti-Semitism, and ADL talks about a 75% increase. In the UK, we see also a surging of anti-Semitism. At the same time, if a historian, let's say, from 50 years, were to capture this moment of American Jewish life, and in particular, education and spreading awareness, they would say that, wow, there was a really robust effort on the part of the Jewish establishment to address anti-Semitism. And here's just a few major players: the ADL, UNESCO, Museum of Tolerance, the United States Holocaust Museum, Jewish Education Project, USC Shoah Foundation, and the UJA, which is the Jewish Federation of America, which has been recently allocated $15 million to fight anti-Semitism. But so I, as an educator, must ask the question, how is it that anti-Semitism, both in rhetoric and behavior, is surging despite this plethora in educational initiatives? And I think we must begin by really interrogating the framing, our methodology. Is anti-Semitism bigotry? Is anti-Semitism a form of intolerance, racism, a violation of human rights? Or does it deserve its own study? I'm going to take a look at two case studies with you today, and that is the recent initiative from UNESCO, in where they are trying to address anti-Semitism through education. If you go on their website, this is basically their 4 learning objectives. The first learning objective is to recognize that anti-Semitism is a problem and must be addressed internationally. The second is that they hope to develop an educational program that addresses anti-Semitism through a framework of human rights and global citizenship. The third being building this capacity of systems that address anti-Semitism. And the fourth is increased investment in social cohesion or social action. For today's purposes, I really want to interrogate the framework. The framework here that is being applied to anti-Semitism is a framework of universalism. And that is, anti-Semitism is but a violation of human rights and global citizenship. Let's take a look at the ADL's pyramid. Here they have a program called Pyramid of Hate, where they speak to middle schools and high schools on how to root out bigotry and hate and anti-Semitism. Again, I want to read to you the quote that accompanies the ADL approach to Jew hatred. Anti-Semitism shows up as a weapon against Jewish people and communities in media, culture, and political system. When it remains unchecked, it endangers our democracy and harms both Jews and other groups. Fine. The most powerful way to counter anti-Semitism is through education about, and here we go, systems of oppression and how to challenge them through equity, inclusion, and allyship. Once again, we are using a universalist approach of understanding what I believe is a very particular and not a universal form of hatred. And so my argument today, my challenge really is, are we using the correct framework to understand this very particular form of hatred? Indeed, if I were to synthesize this framework and I generated a word cloud from the ADL, this is just ADL, not UNESCO, ADL's program called Pyramid, I apologize, I want to make sure I got it right, Pyramid of Hate. If you look at this word cloud, the bigger the word, the more it appears in text. And so again, how are they looking at Jew hatred? They're looking at it as a form of racism, xenophobia, intolerance, fascism. The Holocaust comes up a lot. And if you look at the words that they are using in order to frame the understanding of Jew hatred, they're talking about global citizenship, human rights, United Nations, systems of oppression, combating hate, equity, and inclusion. Now, as an educator, these approaches have consequences on the ground, if you will. And I want to just offer you one case study here in Los Angeles in a major Jewish high school. There was a project, and the project was, we will not be silenced in the face of ... And the project was in commemoration of Kristallnacht. Okay, so we all know Kristallnacht is a very particular moment in Jewish history in what led to the Holocaust. And I want you to see what the students wrote, what they will not be silenced. I will not be silenced in the face of rape culture, sexism, racism, hate, yes, anti-Semitism, homophobia, environmental degradation, gun violence, or any hate. So you see, we have a particular moment in Jewish history, which is Kristallnacht. How does it that Kristallnacht is teaching people to stand against gun violence, rape, sexism, these universal forms of hatred? So in identifying the problem, I'd like to diagnose three issues. The first is the lack of proper education. And here, I understand that it's not popular to take on Holocaust education, but I firmly believe that Holocaust education has not helped, in some cases even fueled anti-Semitism. Framework for understanding this Jew hatred will dictate how one will educate about it. And the third really is discomfort with particularism. And this emanates from within the Jewish world, because if you ask non-Jews, how do they understand anti-Semitism? They understand it very particularly, but the Jews, the Jewish institutions have a very deep discomfort with particularism, the particular nature of anti-Semitism. So allow me to go through a little bit of a history, of a zoomed out history of Jew hatred. Jew hatred, right here, goes by three names: Judeophobia, anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism. Judeophobia is rooted in the accusation that Jews killed Christ. So this is a pretty major accusation of deicide. And St. Augustine focused on the Jews as the enemies of God, destroying the spiritual character of Christianity. The solution was to de-Judaize the European world. So once again, Judeophobia offered a solution to what was the Jewish question, even though the Jewish question had not yet surfaced. Anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism was born as a word, as a term in the late 19th century by a German man named Wilhelm Marr. Now, Wilhelm Marr is a small figure in history. He was a failed politician, failed German politician, but he comes to us as in a very important case study of how anti-Semites mobilize and use their hatred in order to market and sell progressive forms of Jew hatred. So unlike St. Augustine and the Christian theology, Wilhelm Marr's conception of anti-Semitism focused on the supposed racial as opposed to religious character of the Jews. In fact, he himself said, look, I'm not a Judeophobe, I'm an anti-Semite. And he was really progressive. I mean, at the time, to be an anti-Semite, he created the League of Anti-Semites. And in progressive circles, to be an anti-Semite, once again, was a badge of honor. What was the solution to, quote unquote, the Jewish question? Well, it was the annihilation of the Jewish race. So in medieval Europe, the solution was to de-Judaize Europeans. In the 19th and 20th century, it was to annihilate the Jewish race. Why I want to talk to you about this today is it illuminates how anti-Zionists today are using a new language for really this old forms of hatred. So I created this diagram to kind of help us understand the role of the Jew in every epoch, in every time period. So in medieval Europe, Jews were violators of the tenets of Christianity. In 19th and 20th century, Jews were violators of the purity of race. Today, anti-Zionists, Israel, the state of Israel, the Jewish state, is violating human rights. What is interesting about this snapshot is not so much what it says about Jews as much as what it says about what society deems as their northern star. So in every epoch, whatever it is the society has as a guiding moral principle, be it Christianity or social Darwinism, or today human rights, the Jew is this, functions as this avatar, if you will, of that which the society, which the society must get rid of. And here I'm going to quote, Jean-Paul Sartre wrote on the existence of anti-Semitism. He said, if anti-Semitism didn't exist, the anti-Semite would invent the Jew. And it's a very interesting observation from Sartre, because what he's really saying is that the non-Jewish world needs the Jew in order to deflect, in order to kind of mobilize their efforts into what is a moral system. And the Jew becomes that which must be rooted out. Now, back to our question of framing, okay? Today, based on the case study of UNESCO, based on ADL, the way they're looking at anti-Semitism is a violation of systems of oppression, violation of human rights, violation of justice. But what are today's major accusations made against Jews in the state of Israel? Israel is an apartheid state, Zionism is racism, Israel is a settler colonial state, and Israel enacts ethnic cleansing. If you look at all these accusations, what are they? The accusations are that Jews are part of the systems of oppression. Israel, in the position of power, is part of the problem. Zionism is racism, is a violation of human rights. So when you apply these universal systems, you're kind of stuck. How are you going to deal with Jew hatred then, if you've bought into a framework of this universal framework? So it's kind of like you're eating your own tail, if you will. So I'm just going to return to this in a second. What I want to offer, and I know I only have 30 minutes, so I'm being mindful of time. I want to offer a new approach to studying Jew hatred. Now, we know from the work of Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, he wrote a very important piece likening anti-Semitism to a virus. Now, we know viruses now, we are all virologists, if you will. We know viruses have a unique DNA, RNA sequence. And we know that in order to inoculate, to create the correct vaccine, we really need to isolate the sequence. What is the sequence then of this virus, Jew hatred? And this really is my solution here, in the structural approach to the study of Jew hatred, emanates from my field work in the classroom. I've worked in universities and now with high school students in trying to help them understand, how do you identify Jew hatred? And we can go with the route of definitions, but if we go the route of definitions, take a look at this definition of anti-Semitism from the ADL, okay? The belief or behavior hostile towards Jews just because they are Jewish. It may take the form of religious teachings that proclaim the inferiority of Jews, for instance, or political efforts to isolate, oppress, or otherwise injure them. That's wonderful. That is a wonderful definition of anti-Semitism. It's true, but that is not what we are experiencing today. Today's Jew hatred is not accusing Jews of being inferior. Quite the opposite. The issue of power and power dynamics and systems of oppression. So what happens is you offer students these definitions of anti-Semitism that really emanate from a certain historical moment, which is the 19th and 20th century, misusing them, misapplying them to today's moment. So what I decided to do, I isolated the sequence, if you will, the nucleotide sequence of this virus. And I said to myself, well, the interesting thing is that it doesn't matter really which time period we're in, whether 14th, 19th, or 21st century, what region of the world we're in the Middle East, in Soviet Union, in America. What I found is that there are 6 accusations or 6 tropes that are applied to Jews, to Zionists, to the state of Israel. We know that blood libel began in the 12th century in England with the killing of William of Norwich. And we know that today it is actually the most commonly used accusation against the state of Israel. This is Palestinian Media Watch showing a Jewish Dracula with a kippah sinking his teeth into a boy. This boy is wearing the flag of Palestinian flag. Once again, here, the IDF is using the state of Israel as a dagger, as a knife to kill a boy. Notice it's always a little child and it's always a boy. That is the trope. That is it's really important to isolate that trope. Now, right here, this was New York Times. They're in the recent conflict with Gaza and Israel. They put on their front page the following: they were just children. And, a bevy of pictures of innocent kids killed allegedly by the state of Israel. Actually, they had to retract because some of those people were not even killed, or not even killed during this conflict, or not even killed by Israel. But that doesn't matter, because the trope is that Jews indiscriminately, Zionists, the state of Israel, kill innocent children. Blood libel remains to be a very strong trope, an accusation used against Jews today. Here are just two political cartoons from the Arab world on the Abraham Accords. Here it says normalization, here it says in Arabic, Arab governments, and here it says Gaza. And you see the shaking of hands, but instead of the Jewish hand, the Israeli hand, we have a pistol shooting at children. Once again, tapping into blood libel. Right here, you have the UAE shaking hands with this devilish IDF general who holds, a knife with blood, and this innocent UAE man now has blood on his hands, but the blood is emanating from the Jew, and of course, who is drowning in blood? The Palestinians. Here, an anti-Israel protest in the UK showed fake blood with hands on the flag of Israel. Once again, tapping into this really strong accusation. The second accusation is world domination and power. We know that it began with the 1903 forged document, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, and it spread widely into all parts of the world. This is my point. My point is I want to show you that it's not just a phenomenon, Jew hatred and its accusation of world domination and power. It's not just a phenomenon of, Russian Empire. Here we have the Soviet Union cartoon from 1968, where you see an Arab general, carving out, it says here in Russian, Arab countries. In other words, the Jew it's not enough that they have Israel. They're going to really dominate and ensnare the entire Middle East. Once again, this is from a German newspaper, Israel as a spider ensnaring the Middle East. Take a look at this quote. You should make the world understand that Israel is the oppressor and that Israel must be destroyed. Once again, think about applying that universalistic framework that we will fight anti-Semitism in order to fight systems of oppression. But if Israel is the oppressor, what do you do? And right here you have a cartoon also from New York Times from 2018, which they retracted and apologized for, but it was just terrible. Here we have Bibi Netanyahu leading a blind president. The idea here being that, America is being led, dominated by the Jew, by the Jewish state. Demonization is the third accusation in the sequence of Jew hatred in that virus. Starting with the 3rd and 4th century in Christianity in Europe, the idea was that Jews, they take the form of humans. They look just like you and me, but they're actually doing the work of the Satan. How are they doing the work of the Satan? Well, they're tricking you. They're hypnotizing you. They're lying to you. They have supernatural powers. And this is where I'd like to pause on the dangers of conflating racism and anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism, unlike racism, does not view the Jew as inferior. Rather, it views the Jew as being superhuman, superior. Accusations against Jews such as world domination or killing Christ contradict racist ideology. So it's very, very important. If you take a look at ADL's definition of anti-Semitism, which takes a look at, which says that Jews are seen as inferior, that is not the way that anti-Semitism is proliferating today. It's completely different. So let's take a look at, for instance, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar a few years ago tweeted that Israel has hypnotized the world. And I tell my students, if you're not sure, why don't, substitute Israel with the word Jew. The Jews have hypnotized the world, right? This idea that the Jews have these supernatural powers. Soviet Union, it says here, Stalin has taken off his mask. And what's behind his mask? A Jewish devil. Now, why did I include Israel apartheid and the idea that Israel is reenacting Nazi crimes in this slide on demonization? We do not believe, most of us, that there are demons running around and Satan's running around. But if you ask a person in America, what is the most evil thing of the 20th century? And they'll say Nazism, white supremacy, racism. So in effect, what these accusations are, they're basically demonizations. What is the most demonic thing that you could say about the Jewish state? That it is an apartheid state. What is the most demonic thing that you can accuse Jews of? Being Nazis. So I include that in the slide, in this idea of how the anti-Semites are mobilizing the age-old accusations of demonization and now applying it to the state of Israel. Dual loyalty. Dual loyalty emanates, in my understanding, from the French Revolution, when the Jews were emancipated. And it's a famous quote by Count Tonnerre. So Jews should be denied everything as a nation, but granted everything as individuals. And this was a very pivotal moment in how the non-Jew began to look at the Jew, in the sense that, okay, here's the Jewish individual, but then there's the Jewish nation. To whom are they loyal? And it created this division, both within the Jewish world, but also how the non-Jew looked at the Jew. This is a case from 2014. A student at UCLA wanted to be on the student government. And this is the question that was asked her. Given that you are a Jewish student and are very active in the Jewish community, how do you see yourself being able to maintain an unbiased view, especially when it comes to Israel? Now, we know if, let's say this was, given that you are an African-American student and very active in the Black community, how do you see yourself being able to maintain an unbiased view, especially when it comes to race relations? It's terrible, it's egregious. But with Jews, this question of questioning their loyalty is something that keeps on coming up. The fifth trope in that sequence of Jew hatred is dehumanization. Now, this is the one that I tell my students shares kind of with racism. Because what is racism? The belief that, one, in simple terms, one race is superior to another, thus another race is inferior. This is what the Nazis used in their propaganda against the Jews. This is not what is being used today, by the way. That's why I believe that the state of Israel is facing demonization, not dehumanization. Here we have a famous German Nazi era newspaper, Der Stürmer. It says the Spider. He's about to ensnare this Jewish woman, this Aryan woman. He's about to kill her. Here we go again with the German depiction of the state of Israel as a spider. This is from the Soviet Union. It says Zionism in Russian. This is also from the Soviet Union, a big spider, and it says Zionism. So it's even more than just dehumanization. It's really, it's both kind of this Jew is while they look, just like you and me, they're really, they have these machinations where they're trying to ensnare you. This is from Palestinian Media Watch. We have a rat with a Jewish star. And of course, money and greed applied to Jews. Again, Ilhan Omar tweeted about AIPAC, that it's all about the Benjamin's baby. This is from the Soviet Union. It says Zionism, and he's like this greedy capitalist. Now, the topology of Jew hatred has consequences. So these 6 accusations, so what I'm arguing for is the framework has to be very particular. We have to really understand that Jew hatred does not look like other forms of hatred. It may share certain tropes such as dehumanization, but it looks completely different. That's one thing. The other thing I'd like to really talk to you today about is that these accusations have consequences. If you accuse a group of people of killing innocent children in order to drain their blood, they're evil. if you accuse them of trying to dominate the world or having usurped power and are now part of the systems of oppression, they're not trustworthy. If you think that they are doing the work of demons, or if they're just like the Nazis, they're evil. If their loyalty, where's their loyalty lay, they're untrustworthy. And if they're subhuman, they're illegitimate. And if they could sell you for money, if they're all about the Benjamins, well, they're untrustworthy. Now, what do you do with a population that is evil, that is untrustworthy, and is illegitimate? And what you do with that population is you deny their right to exist. And this is very important in understanding Jew hatred, okay? Jew hatred is eliminationist. If you recall, during the time of Judeophobia, the answer to the quote unquote Jewish question was to de-Judaize Europe. In the 19th and 20th century, the answer was the final solution. We must understand that anti-Zionism, even it's just Jew hatred, is really about elimination. It's an eliminationist ideology. So here you go. And these are the mechanisms for which you convince the world and convince the population to do away with these demonic, untrustworthy, evil people. I want to conclude with the case of Rose Ritch. Rose Ritch at USC in 2020 resigned from student council. What was the reason for her resignation? She was accused of racial misconduct. This is what she said: my support of Israel makes me complicit in racism. My Zionism makes me a racist. The Black Student Assembly has supported her resignation. And Ritch accepts the human rights abuses to Palestinians at the head of Israel and IDF. What does that mean? She's accused of bigotry, of racism, and a violation of human rights system. But what does she experience? She's experiencing Jew hatred. So how do you reconcile these universalist frames where she's experiencing something very particular? She did not experience racism. Now, the USC Shoah Foundation responded the following statement, that when it happened, and many organizations rang the alarm bell that what she experienced was absolute Jew hatred, known as anti-Zionism today, USC Shoah Foundation said, we are here to build alliances, to counter hatred, to foster a culture of anti-racism, against growing waves of anti-Black racism, It just because of time, recent events are clear. Amid the rise of violent anti-Semitism, we launched an initiative that draws on the power of testimony to help students counter systems of hate and oppression. Now, I started today with a quote by Lenin, and I want to just show them to you side by side, in the sense that both of these initiatives both of the language here point to a bigger problem. USC Shoah Foundation is not necessarily interested in rooting out anti-Semitism, but rather systems of hate and oppression. Lenin was not interested in rooting out anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism was used in order to root out capitalism. That's the bigger problem that we have here. And finally, I want to conclude with this kind of ontology of Jew hatred, this very unique form, going by different names, but utilizing similar accusations. Some of them recede, some of them become prominent. So during the time of Judeophobia, blood libel, demonization were prominent. During the era of anti-Semitism, dehumanization, world domination, and dual loyalty were prominent. Today, it's blood libel, power, and demonization. It is not dehumanization. And so that is where I would like to conclude with us today. I want us to understand that the way that we frame this very particular, misunderstood form of hatred, instead of looking at it as anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism, but rather let's take a look at how it manifests. Let's take a look at these 6 nucleotides, if you will. And in that way, we'll be able to understand Jew hatred. So that is the talk today. I'm sorry, I had to rush through the end. But that is basically what I wanted to impart to the audience today, that it's very dangerous and alarming to me that major Jewish organizations and institutions are applying a universalist lens to understanding a very particular form of hatred. and in doing so are struggling. Because if you're talking about violations of human rights and Israel is accused of violating human rights, what do you do?
Hey, thank you so much for an amazing and really innovative approach to this whole issue of anti-Semitism. Several people from the audience had a different kind of universalism versus particularism question to ask you, which is, when we think about the anti-Semites themselves, do you find that anti-Semites, people who hate Jews, are also full of hate for other groups? Or is it, like, in other words, is a person who's geared to hate, is that, are they universalistic in the direction of their hatreds? Or is that particularistic? They could hate Jews, but be really nice and accepting to other people. What is your research on?
Well, it's a really good question. I think this question is more about human psychology and the way, the human condition. Hatred is universal. And, organizations that tell you that they're going to, root out, they're going to create a system that will, we're going to end Jew hatred, we're going to end racism. That's nonsense, sorry to say. The truth of the matter is people do hate. I guess my question to the person who asked that question would be, why does that matter? So if, for instance, somebody hates the Jews and doesn't hate, let's say, the Black community, what is the question really about, is what I'm trying to understand.
So this, actually, there was some discussion on the chat line between people watching, which brought this out. And one of the people watching you made the point that in that sense, it's the canary in the coal mine story. You should be against anti-Semitism because not only will people like that hate Jews, but they might hate other groups you care more about.
Oh, I completely agree with this. Robert Ritch said that anti-Semitism or Jew hatred is the oldest hatred. And he didn't say this because he wanted, brownie points, like, yay, we are the most hated. It's actually very important. What he's saying is that if we want to understand other forms of hatred, understanding the first form of hatred will shed light and help us educate about other forms of hatred. Because look, Jew hatred predates racism, homophobia, xenophobia. Sometimes I ask my students when I give a talk, when do you think Jew hatred started? When do you think anti-Semitism started? Sadly, many students say with the Holocaust. So people don't even understand that how it began, why it began, why are the Jewish people facing and will always face Jew hatred. But yes, because it is one of the oldest forms of hatred, it could help us understand other forms of hatred.
I will bring to the table an experience I had with a student once when I was talking about Jewish organizations and bringing information about ADL. It was quite interesting to me, the way you talk about the way universalism really distorts the way people understand anti-Semitism. I wonder, though, if organizations like ADL, and they're not the only ones, are influenced by the attitudes of younger American Jews. So one of the young women in my class said, Jewish organizations only care about the Jews. They don't care about other people. So perhaps the universalism that you critiqued, and your critique was very persuasive, but maybe one of the reasons that Jewish organizations take a universalistic approach is so that they can get the attention of younger Jews who are turned off by what they see as the parochialism of Jews. And I'm using that word parochialism.
Yes.
Okay, so what are your thoughts?
Listen, this is a bigger question. One of the things that I began with is talking about the discomfort that emanates from the Jewish world, not the non-Jewish world, about the particular nature of anti-Semitism, which actually is about the particular nature of who are the Jews. Are the Jews a people, a universalist people, or do they have a particular mission? Really, we're talking about anti-Semitism, but we're really talking about is Jewish identity. And you're absolutely right. I work with young people and they are very uncomfortable with the idea of this Jewish particularism. Daniel Gordis and his book, Divided We Stand, really, I think, hit the nail on the head in his analysis of why is American Jewry at odds with Israel. Because Israel is particular. It's a nation state. When the nation state laws in 2019 or 2018 came, who was vociferously against them? The Jewish community, because it was parochial. The Jews have always sought acceptance. And what is that acceptance? To be like everyone else, to appeal to everyone else. Unfortunately, that strategy has not helped. We saw this. Jews stand with all minorities. And when it happened in May, my students told me, I don't understand. I stood with them during this movement. I stood with my students with LGBT. And they don't stand with me on anti-Semitism. So we failed. It's kind of a projection, if you will. We thought, well, if we will stand with everyone else, surely they'll stand with us. But they didn't. And the reason they didn't stand with us is because Israel is seen as part of the systems of oppression.
So some of the questions are around how Israel is treated by organizations such as organizations in the UN and also by the world press, specifically in terms of the double standard, looking at what is going on in other actual countries in the world. Do you have any thoughts you can share with us about the double standard in the way Jews in Israel are evaluated compared to other people and other countries?
Well, I want to return to that diagram that I spoke about, which is that in every epoch, the Jew is the violator. Forget Israel for a second. The reason Israel is the target, it's the soft target for the Jews right now, right? In the 19th century, it was the Jews who were violators. Right now, it's Israel, as you say, in the UN, in the recent Amnesty International report. And Jewish organizations are talking about, well, that's double standards. That's double standards. My issue with double standards is the following. When you say, well, you're applying double standards, in a way, you're agreeing that Israel is violating human rights and is an apartheid state. You understand? So when you say, well, that's a double standard, inadvertently, what you're saying is, okay, yeah, I know Israel may be doing all these horrible things, but why not look at China? Why not look at what's happening on the African continent? Why not look at North Korea? Why not look at Qatar, Saudi Arabia? So I understand the impetus to say, well, that's a double standard, but I think we need to actually call out, these are lies. These are lies. Lies meant to demonize the state of Israel. Lies meant, look, the Nazis created a propaganda that, and what was their lie? To dehumanize the Jews. Right now, they're demonizing the state of Israel. We are living in the time of demonization of the Jews vis-a-vis Israel. And every single time we say it's a double standard, yes, and inadvertently, you're actually not addressing the bigger problem, which is that, no, that's a lie. No, there's no apartheid. Another thing that I tell my students about the accusation of apartheid, well, let me ask you this question, everyone on this call today, on this webinar. When you accuse Israel of an apartheid, do you think the people who are accusing them of this terrible crime are sitting around the table thinking, let's help Israel transition into a democracy? Because, they're an apartheid, so let's help. No. The intent behind that is to completely dismantle. What do you do with an apartheid state? You dismantle it.
Okay, so given that these are the problems,
yes.
Another person wants to know, what do you think are programs that work? what could actually be done to change these opinions?
So I work with teens in an organization called Club Z, which I'm very proud of. We do really amazing, radically different work. We reorient Jewish identity from conversations of Judaism rather, Jewish is not a religion, but rather an ethnicity and we are part of a people. I also think that we need to educate people correctly. Why have these initiatives failed? I began with the question, anti-Semitism is surging. If a historian were going to write about this moment and look at and survey the landscape, they would see, my God, there's this bevy of Jewish organizations that are addressing or hoping to address or raise awareness, but it's not helping. In fact, sometimes it's actually contributing to the problem. So I believe in education, but it has to be correct. We have to understand that Jew hatred is very unique. It is not part of a systems of oppression. I also began with a quote by Lenin. Lenin was not concerned with anti-Semitism. Lenin was using anti-Semitism to talk about a greater evil, capitalism. People in the United Nations or Amnesty who are concerned about rooting out racism are using anti-Semitism, but also applying racism to the state of Israel. So you have to have a very clear understanding of what is anti-Semitism. What is this form of hatred? How does it manifest? We've done a great job in the United States of America and probably in Europe. I'm not as well versed on European education. We've done a wonderful job in the United States of America educating the population about Nazism. Swastikas, we understand, are terrible. But what do you do when you pass a protest and you see an Israeli flag drenched in fake blood? That's not a swastika. What do you do there? If you can't identify that this is blood libel, then you don't know what to do. This is not racism. The Jews are not suffering from racism in the United States. We are not seen as inferior, quite the opposite. We're seen as superior, as having too much power, white privilege. That's where we're at right now. And using that universal lens is not going to be helpful.
So you have a wonderful organization that you head up, which is called Club Z.
Yes.
One of the listeners wanted to know, how does one join Club Z? And are there other organizations for other populations that do similar work?
So we are I love to that we are the only teen organization. I mean, there's also Jewish teen organizations such as BBYO, USY, NIFTY. There are many Jewish teen organizations, but what we do, which is so really unique, is we empower our teens through knowledge, not talking points, rich conversations, conceptualizations. What does it mean to be a Jew? What does it mean to live in a diaspora? What does it mean to be part of a particular people? To not, when I was in college, my Jewish friends accused me of being tribal, parochial. And I tell my students, they're going to tell you that you care only about the Jews, you're parochial. If you want to be part, you want a seat at the intersectional table, you got to, quote unquote, check your Zionism, leave it at the door. We have to find a way for the Jewish people to reclaim their pride. That's what we do. How do we you can get involved by writing to me. My email is naya@clubz.org. We give talks. We have amazing speakers. We bring in professors. Our curriculum rests on 3 pillars: peoplehood, Zionism, and advocacy. We do not shy away from advocacy or activism. And 2 concepts are very, very key to our curriculum. Jews are indigenous to the land of Israel, and international law. We do a lot of work with Professor Eugene Kantarovich, who talks a lot about international legal rights of the state of Israel. So our students are very well equipped, not with talking points.
Okay. I would also like to add to the wonderful work of Club Z, the work that ISGAP does.
Yes.
Amazing classes, which really educate people all around the world, including people who teach people, which is another way, I think, to get the word out. And I find it fascinating when you say not just talking points. One of your viewers wants to know, is it okay if people take pictures of and copy the wonderful slides that you included in your lecture?
Yes.
Okay.
But I always say, people say, oh, can we have your PowerPoints? Can we have your lessons? Without proper training, people can take things out of context. And so, I'm just, with caution, so a lot of these slides require a lot of explanation and unpacking, but absolutely, yes.
Okay, great. So you have Dr. Lecht's slides, and please give her credit and ISGAP credit for this. And I have another question for you, which is a little different than the questions that you've had so far. When you think of your definition of anti-Semitism, what about some of the famous statements that have been made by celebrities? Most recently, perhaps, Whoopi Goldberg. Is what she was saying anti-Semitism, according to your definition?
Good question. Very good question. Yes, it would fall into well, again, I don't want to use the term anti-Semitism. I'd rather use the term Jew hatred, because anti-Semitism really, again, emanates from a very particular historical moment of Wilhelm Marr in the 19th, 20th century. Whoopi Goldberg is part of a proliferation of CRT, critical race theory, which again views Jews in the position of power. And so her comment that this was, just white on white crime, it really taps into, again, one of those accusations of power and world domination. So yes, it is, but it requires a lot of unpacking and understanding. We're living in a moment today in the United States of America where Jews are accused of being white passing. What that really means is the Jews have too much power. The Jews are they are in the position of power, and that's what she's alluding to.
Yeah, Bret Stephens makes the point that there were some very wealthy Jews in Germany and other countries who were nevertheless sent to Auschwitz, so that money and power do not protect one from what anti-Semitism does. Okay, one of your viewers wanted to know if a recording of this talk is available, and yes, the recording will be available of this talk with all the slides at ISGAP's YouTube channel very soon. So everyone should be aware of that. Really want to thank you for, I think, a rich and, as I said, very innovative. Your approach is quite refreshing, a miserable topic, but a very refreshing approach. And thank you so much, Dr. Naya Lecht, for a powerful and intriguing talk, and for all the wonderful work that you do. Thanks to everyone who was with us this morning.
Everyone, and do reach out to Club Z. We do wonderful work. Thank you. And thank you, ISGAP, so much. I love the work that you do. I love everything. So thank you so much.
Everyone, take care.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.